Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, the podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games just minutes after playing them. My name's Tim.
And this is Chris.
And this is Steve.
And today we're going to give our hot take review on the game we just finished playing, Rising Sun. But before we do, I have some poll results to cover with you all. This week on Twitter, I asked a poll, and I do this every week, by the way, so if you don't follow us on Twitter, you should at BG_hot takes. And then you can be a part of this poll and you can leave some comments and read all of the other great comments that are going on there. But hey, before I jump into that, did you hear a different voice today? That was Steve. Steve has not been on the show for probably 6 months or something like that. A comedy of errors led to some strange things that might be happening on the show tonight. First, Adam's poor family got sick tonight, so he couldn't join us for the podcast. So Steve was nice enough to jump in. If you haven't listened way back when, he plays games with us every week, but he usually doesn't join us on the podcast. So this week he's joining us. He's going to be our third voice. The second thing that happened is that I'm traveling this week and I'm in a VRBO and I set myself up in a nice quiet room. And then my daughter got sick and now she's sleeping in that room and I had to move out of it. So if there's a lot of echo tonight, I apologize. I'm out in the main living space of the house I'm renting in. So if we have poor sound quality and a different guest, it's because of all kinds of strange stuff happen. Anyway, let's get back to the poll results. So I asked a question, is it okay to concede a board game if concession isn't in the rule book? And I have some really, really strong thoughts about this. So I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say. Some of our listeners had some really strong results about this. This was the most interesting poll that I've asked. I think I got the best answers. 40 different people answered on here, 310 voted on the results here. So a lot of people have strong thoughts. Here were the options I gave on the poll. Number 1, never. It's never okay to concede. Number 2, anytime, concede whenever you want to. And number 3, I said 2-player games only. How did you guys answer this?
So that was a great question, Tim. And it's a particularly interesting question to me because I'm one of these people that gets a couple rounds into a game. And if I feel like I'm doing terribly, man, I want to bail. I want to start over again. I want to play something different, whatever. Maybe it's kind of, maybe I have a bitter attitude about it. I don't know. But I'm someone who really loves the idea of being able to resign a game. Just last week, I was talking about playing diplomacy and how after a round or two of that, I just desperately wanted to resign the game. But it's also, I think, a really complicated question because as much as I'd love to do that sometimes, I don't think it's the right thing to do generally. I think there are probably games, and I don't think I've played any of them where it's actually part of the game, where you can resign. Well, actually, I take that back. It is a part of Through the Ages, and that's one that I've played. But generally, it's not a part of the game. And I think also generally, it tends to throw off the evening or the game session for the other people who are playing. So there's not a lot of games where one player can just bow out and there's no impact on the rest of it and everybody else can just keep on rolling. I think it really does have an impact. And depending upon the mood that it's done in, that can be kind of a bummer. If one person's like, yeah, you know what, this sucks, I'm out of here. That's kind of a bummer. So I don't want to ruin anybody's game night. So I think the answer is if it can be done in a way where you can reliably not mess up the rest of the game night for everybody else, I think it can be okay. But as a general rule, I really try to avoid it because I think that it's tough to do that without having it affect everything else.
So what you meant to say, Chris, was 2-player games only because that is the only time where you can resign and not throw off everybody else's game.
Even then, it feels kind of lame. So not exactly. As usual, the categories were all wrong.
I mean, Azul, for instance, is a more than 2-player game where one player dropping out would have essentially no impact whatsoever on the other players, right?
No, untrue. It would have an impact because it changes the flow of the game and what people are going for. But also, it's like a 25-minute game. Why would you ever drop out of it? Just stick it through to the end.
For my answer, it wasn't going to be anything about Azul. But I think the only case, aside from, an emergency or whatever, is a time limit, right? Like, how many hours after you start the game is it okay to walk away from? And, how many hours are left in the game? So that would be kind of probably the only time I've ever left a game is if it's just going on forever. But Chris, I did have a follow-up question for you. And that is, from the very first session of Diplomacy, you hated it. Why did you keep playing that game?
For all the reasons that I just said. I didn't want to be the guy who busted up the game and kind of, well, okay. a little bit more complicated because it was a group of people that I had just started gaming with, and I was invited to join in this game with them. It was an online one, so it was taking place over multiple weeks. And I didn't want to have this be one of my first experiences with these folks, and I'm going to be the loser who drops out.
Yeah, Steve, you made a good point about time limit. Now, we're all adults that have adult responsibilities, and there are emergencies. Like, I remember the first night that we decided we were going to record a podcast on game night, and we're like 15 minutes into Pan Am, and Chris had to bow out because of a family emergency, right? And it doesn't happen too often, but can happen. And tonight I almost had to bow out because my daughter came down with a fever. So we were worried she had COVID, and that could change a lot of stuff. And luckily she tested negative, but I might have had to be like, guys, my daughter's got a major illness right now. I got to go. We got to stop game night, or I'm going to have to jump out of here. So there are obviously emergencies. I'm not even considering that. Obviously, if there's an emergency, that emergency is more important than your game. So if somebody has to bow out because of an emergency, great. I had one situation where I went over to game with some friends for an afternoon, and the first game we played took longer than expected. So we had planned to play a second game. We all learned it in advance. We were going through rules teach, and then it was kind of past the time that I'd committed to being home and taking care of my daughter while my wife had something. So I had to drop out of that game, and I felt terrible about that. Almost that was not an acceptable thing. I should have bowed out before the game started. I didn't plan well enough for that. So I made a mistake on that. But what I'm talking about is like you're in the game and you're not having fun. Maybe it's a new game someone just taught you, you're not enjoying it. Or it's a new game, you're getting beat up on, you're losing. That's kind of what I was trying to get to with this question. So here's my answer to it. Generally, when you sit down with a game night with some friends and you know that it's listen, you surprise a friend and say, hey, you want to play a game with me? And they think they're playing, Sorry, and it's going to take half an hour. And then you sit down and play Through the Ages with them, and it's 5 hours after an hour teach. They should leave because you're a jerk for bringing them into that. If it's a bunch of hobby board game friends, people that know what to expect in a game night, you're expecting to sit down. You've got a social contract with your friends. Say, I'm going to sit down for somewhere between 1 and 3 hours and learn this game with you and play it. And we're all going to be kind of struggling through the first play, and that's just what you expect with a game night. So that social contract says, I don't care how you're doing. I'm going to sit here and play this with you, and I'm going to try to make the best of the situation. That's my feeling on it. So I don't think any time is an acceptable answer to this. Now, there's another side to that coin, and a lot of people responded with this. Game night is there to be fun for people, right? You're not there to be a slave to this system. You're not there to be trapped in this situation. And it's hard for me to say, yeah, it's never okay to resign, because I've sat down for a game with my wife, and I'm teaching her a new game, and we're halfway through, and you can see that she's miserable, and it's making me miserable. And I'm like, yes, please, let's just stop playing this game, because nobody's having fun here. I'm not going to force you through it. And that's why I think in a 2-player situation, it's completely okay, right? Somebody's clearly can't come back and win the game. Just resign, move on to the next one. It does take a little bit from the player who's winning, and the fact that they get to play out their game and finish the strategy they worked on. But in a 2-player game, I think it's okay. But if it's more than 2 players, I think generally it's not okay. Except for emergencies, you should not say, hey, I agreed to sit down and play a game with you guys tonight. I didn't exactly know how it was going to go, but I'm going to step away from it. So that's my general feeling, is that unless it's an extreme circumstance, it's not okay to do that. All right, so I'm just going to read a couple answers here. Now, there's a whole bunch of great ones. I'd love to read every single answer in here, but we could go all night on this. Brian McKinnis said, I voted any time, but this was an evolution of my thinking. Personally, I won't concede. Take those playing for last place moments to explore the mechanisms and observe other strategies. Learned with my wife that allowing others to concede creates space for future fun and gaming. I love that. This is how I feel. If I'm playing a game and I'm losing, I'm clearly getting beat down, there's no chance for me to win, who cares? I get to explore the systems. I get to try some strategies. I get to set my own personal little goals to say, like, hey, I know I can't win this, but at least maybe I'll try to catch up to third place, or I'll try to catch up to second place. That's fine. Like, I can still have fun finding those little goals and doing that. But as Brian is saying here, is that his wife, if she's not happy playing and then she can concede, now they can move on to the next gameplay. And there's a lot of truth to that, right? So I think that's great. Again, 2-player system here. Alec McKinsey said, I used to say never until I played Oath, and 2 of 4 players having a miserable time and wanted to concede. On one hand, players should be willing to see a game through to the end, which is what I've said. On the other hand, players should be willing to end a game when others are obviously not having fun. You know what? 100%, right? Like, if it's one player, that's so hard. Like, I don't want to end the game session for everybody if 3 people are having fun and one's not. But if 2 players are just miserable, and I can see why oath might make somebody miserable. I've read the rules on that. I know what you got in that box. That's something that, yeah, I don't want to make 2 people, like half the table, just sit there and struggle through it. So then that's a good situation to say, like, okay, guys, why don't we end this? Me and Bob will come back. We'll pull some other people into it. We'll try this another night. Let's play something everyone's going to have fun with. One last one I'm going to answer here. David Mann said, if there are 3 or more players, and if quitting ruins the game for other players, then I consider it unacceptable, barring a very good reason. I would avoid playing with someone who did that. If there are only 2 players, then I don't see a problem. That's pretty much what I've been saying. I think David and I are pretty aligned here. So what do you guys think about that?
I really like that idea of taking the opportunity to feel out some different strategies, some, different mechanisms you might not otherwise explore. That's a really good way of looking at that. And I don't think that's my natural habitat, so I'd have to take some, mental energy to get into that space. But I actually think that's a really healthy, really good way of exploring a game. I mean, that's actually pretty cool. The other thing that's really interesting, despite the fact that I say I don't like the idea of bailing on a game and dropping out, I never feel judgy about people who do it. I don't think I've ever been in a game where someone said, I won out, and I said, man, they're being a jerk. In particular, if it's someone who's not a huge gamer. So like my wife, or if I've got, non-gaming friends who are trying something and they're not really loving it, I'm happy to let them stop. I mean, I don't want anybody to have a bad time. I don't want anybody to have a unfortunate experience with a game, especially if they're not real solid gamers. So I don't feel like judging people on that. I just feel hard on myself for doing that.
I'll be judgy about it.
So I think they're all good points, right? Like the point of playing these games for most people anyway is to have fun. If somebody's not having fun, then where's the priority of social contracts? Is the more important social contract that you agreed to play the game, or is the more important social contract that you're there to have a good time? And it's situational, right? If there's 6 people and you're 20 minutes into a 40-minute game, someone leaving is probably going to have a big impact, and they could just wait it out another 20 minutes. If it's a 6-hour game and someone's not having a good time, you're going to hold them hostage for 3 hours, or you're never going to play with them again, right? So there has to be some give and take there. In general, it's definitely always preferable that people not leave in the middle of the game, right? So that's easy enough to say.
Yeah, no, the last thing I want to mention is that I think this goes back to our poll last week where we talked about just making the game night fun for other people, right? And not like, just if you're not having a good time, don't ruin the game night for everybody else. And that's what this leads to. Obviously, there's extreme situations. Yes, if it's a 7-hour game and nobody told you it was going to be 7 hours, you thought it was going to be an hour, and now you're stuck there and doing something miserable, maybe at least talk to the group and say, like, guys, I'm not having fun here. Do you think we could switch and do something else? Sometimes it's like, listen, I played a couple of games where I just did not think they were good games at all, but other people were having fun. So I'm here for everybody to have fun. Let's make the game better for everybody, and more likely I'll have more fun with it if I just go in with that mindset instead of saying I'm miserable, I want to get out of this. You have to give a little bit to get something from your friends and get something from the social experience as well. All right. Well, anyway, that is enough talk about that. We went on very long. Let's jump into a gameplay description of Rising Sun.
Rising Sun is an area control game in which 3 to 5 players vie for honor and dominance in feudal Japan. The game is the second in designer Eric Lang's trilogy that also includes Blood Rage and Ankh, so fans of those games will see a lot of through lines. So each player takes on the role of a clan, each with its own asymmetric ability, and 3 different types of characters: the leader, or daimyo, Shinto, or priests, and bushi, or warriors. Players may also have the opportunity throughout the game to recruit some fearsome monsters or the wandering samurai known as Ronin. And here's a historic fun fact that actually helps make it easier to understand and enjoy the game. Shintoism began in the 8th century and was the official state religion of Japan up until 1945. One of its primary tenets was the belief in a sacred power called kami that inhabits both animate and inanimate objects, and which we'll also be meeting in Rising Sun. Rising Sun takes place on a large map broken down into the various regions of Japan. The action takes place over the course of 4 rounds, 1 for each season, with spring through autumn making up the bulk of the game and winter being primarily a scoring phase. Like other games in Lang's trilogy, each round is broken down into a series of defined phases. The first is the tea ceremony. During this phase, players will get to decide whether or not to form alliances. Alliances can be a valuable tool since they affect various aspects of play and result in certain defined benefits for the members of each alliance, but we'll get into that more below. Next comes the political phase. This phase is one of the two that make up the bulk of the action in each round. During the political phase, the players, in order, choose a political action from a common deck, leaving the remaining actions for subsequent players. Now, here's a brief description of each. The recruit action lets players, you guessed it, recruit. Players can use this action to bring new figures onto the board. Of special note in this action is that when a player recruits a Shinto warrior, that figure can either be placed on the map or onto one of 4 shrines at the top of the board. More on that later. The martial action in Rising Sun is essentially the move action. It lets players move figures around the board to an adjacent territory. The train action allows players to purchase a card from a common trade row. There are several types of cards, such as endgame scoring cards, cards that give special powers, or, my favorite, the monster cards. Anyone who's ever played an Eric Lang game is very familiar with his love of mythical monsters, and Rising Sun's no exception. Once purchased, these powerful monsters are essentially drafted into the purchasing player's army. The harvest action lets players harvest special income associated with various territories. So for example, one territory has an income of 2 coins and 2 victory points. The harvest action lets the player claim those benefits from that spot. Finally, there's the betray action, which is essentially the nuclear option of Rising Sun. In other words, use it and you won't have any friends left. The betraying player can replace 2 figures from different players on the board with their own figures of the same type. If the active player does this to an ally, the alliance, needless to say, is broken. There are 2 other important aspects of political action selection that I'll mention. First, for every action but betrayal and purchasing cards from the trade row, each player gets to take that action, but the active player gets to go last. Second, each action confers a special benefit for players that are in alliances. See, I told you those alliances had a purpose. At defined points throughout the action phase, the players will also score the shrines at the top of the board. Each shrine confers a benefit, and the player with the most Shinto in each shrine gets that benefit. Finally comes the war phase. During this phase, players will count up their power in each contested region, and the winner gets to take the valuable region token as a prize for endgame scoring. But before doing that, there are a couple of steps that need to be resolved, and that can dramatically affect the outcome, ranging from committing ritual suicide to hiring Ronin to fight for you. For each of these steps, players will have the opportunity to make secret bids, and the player who bids the most coins for each action gets to take that action. After warfare comes the income phase and a new season begins. And then finally, after autumn comes the winter and a few more opportunities for endgame scoring, and once those victory points have been tallied, the players will compare scores and the player with the highest score will be the winner. Rising Sun was designed by Eric M. Lang and is published by Simon Games.
Thanks, Chris. So this was, for all 3 of us, our first play of Rising Sun tonight, and we played this on Tabletop Simulator. So let's start out with the gameplay and mechanisms, as we always do. And I'll start here. The one thing I want to call out first is the temple slots, and this has to do with the Shinto. This is a specific type of character that you can recruit in the board. Now, this is an area control game, and so, generally when you're playing an area control game, you're going after territories within the board, and there's some interesting things going on there. But a certain type of character every player has, I think everybody starts with 3 of them, are these Shinto, and they can be used to go to these temple spots that are up at the top of the board. And that was a really fun decision because you can either leave the Shinto in the battle to be 1 power, or you can go up and play this other area control game for these kind of special abilities that will trigger a few times throughout the political phase of the game. And I really enjoyed that. Now, we only played with the recommended starting temples, which gave you a few different things. One of them moved you to the top of the honor track. One of them let you move a couple characters. One of them gave you some Ronin, and one of them gave you some coins. So some good benefits. But it's so cool, too, that they set this up to not just always be the same temples. Like, there are tiles you can switch out to make those different rewards every game, which is one of the many ways this game adds some variability to it. But I thought that was a really cool decision every time. A fun little thing that you could pursue, but you could completely ignore, and you might benefit from ignoring it and just going after the area control on the board. But I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, I like those too. I thought that it would be fun to see what some of the other option cards were, because we played the basic cards. We played the basic temples. And it felt like they were kind of, I mean, a couple coins, that's nice. A couple Ronin, that's decent. But they didn't feel huge. I feel like we did spend a lot of time fighting over them because those small benefits actually ended up being pretty meaningful. They may not have seemed super exciting, but they really did have an impact on the game. In particular, one temple that allowed the player who won that temple to move up to the top of the honor track, which I'll just add because I didn't really get into it in the game description. The honor track is huge because it's the tiebreaker throughout this game, and there's a descending order. So, Tim might be first, Steve be second, I might be third. And so Tim is going to win in any situation where there's a tie between two players or there's some priority that's given. And there's a lot of ties in this game because frequently you're dealing in ones and twos and threes on all kinds of different things, whether it's coins or battles and power, strength, whatever. There's a lot of that. And so it comes into play a whole lot. So that was a very meaningful thing. What I'm curious about is whether after multiple plays, we would end up using the Shinto more for their combat strength than we did tonight. Because I don't think any of us actually used Shinto for combat. Or maybe I'm misremembering, but I think we used them all for the shrines.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, Chris, but I think there's a valuable potential there. It's a good question. I think situationally it could. Here were the other shrines that were available that in the base box. One of them would give you a point for every stronghold you have on the map. So potentially a couple, 2 to 3 points maybe in a round. One of them would let you pull a Bushi out and deploy it out on the map. And the other one would let you basically do the train action. So you could buy one of the cards that were available for that season. So, definitely a little bit of variety there. I think the most interesting thing that was said in this first set was the fact that the first card that gets that gets hit here is the one that raises your honor, which could potentially change what the other cards did. If that wasn't in the track, then it would definitely change the evaluation of how these cards work. So really cool. But anyway, it's it's going to be a blend, and maybe that raise your honor one ends up randomly coming up at the end of the track, and then it completely changes how valuable that is as well. Yeah. So cool thing for me.
So my take on the temple slots was that you guys were going to spend a lot of time fighting over honor. And so after the first time that happened, I decided to not spend my resources at all with honor. So after the first couple of actions in the game, I was at the bottom of the honor track for the remainder of the game until the very last combat. And in particular, the clan that I was playing could swap Ronin and coins. And so the Ronin and coin slots were particularly valuable for me. So I felt that those had more value than dealing with the honor. But also I did use my Shinto a couple of times for combat because I wasn't focused super heavy up there on the top. And it did cost me a couple of those rewards because other people were able to come in and take them away from me, but I thought that was an interesting balance.
Yeah, okay, so you did use your Shinto a little bit, and I will say also that I felt pretty bad for Steve in the first round because he was really upset that he didn't get an alliance while Chris and I did. And so I could have, because of my higher honor, I could have taken both those other temples from him in the first round. And I thought, I don't need to kick someone while they're down. He ended up winning the game, by the way, so that was a bad decision. But the honor does make a difference. And like if I wanted to play mean, I could have taken those things because you didn't have the honor for it. So you're lucky that you that I have honor, and then that you took advantage of it. So.
Doesn't sound very honorable.
Tim, man of honor. So the thing that I found, well, there's two things that I found most striking about this game, one of which is good, one of which is bad. I'll talk about the good one first, and that was the combat. Oh man, the combat in this game was fun. I mean, I have come to love Eric Lang's combat mechanisms. Blood Rage is one of my all-time favorites, and I feel like Rising Sun kicked it up even a notch further. Because you've got your basic power on the board, just like in Blood Rage. But in Blood Rage, then you draw a card, and your cards that you play are going to add and change what happens as the battle progresses. But in Rising Sun, you have your board, and there are 4 different potential combat actions that can happen. One of them is Seppuku, or Ritual Suicide, which allows you to take all your characters off of the board, or at least off of that territory, and get honor and points for each one. Which, again, because honor is such a dramatic thing in the game, that can be huge right there, because you can pull your guys off, put yourself to the top of the honor track, and then be prepared to win the next battle because you're at the top of the honor track now. The second one is taking a hostage, or taking one of the other characters, the opponent's characters, off of the board. The third one is playing the Ronin that you've collected over the course of the game. So you can keep collecting Ronin, but you have to actually use this action to be able to play them. And lastly, there is what's called, I think it was Imperial Poets, which is the action that lets you collect points for every figure that's destroyed in the battle. Now, for each of these, you have to bid coins. Only the player who bids the most coins gets to take that action. So if Tim may be killing me in the battle, and he knows that I'm going to want to do seppuku so that I can get some points out of it, and he may outbid me even though he has no intention of actually taking his characters off the board, because he doesn't want me to be able to do it. So it's just a super clever little cat and mouse game that you're playing that's so much more complex than just picking a card. You're picking with each of these, you're picking which actions you want to invest in and how much you want to invest in them. And I thought it was absolutely fascinating. I enjoyed every battle of this game, even the ones where I got my butt handed to me. I still had just so much fun with that.
Yeah, I really liked the blend of open information with the hidden weights, right? Like, we knew before each combat started how many of each character type or figure type were in that region. We knew how much money each person had. We knew how many Ronins each person had. We knew what cards they had that gave them special combat abilities. But what you don't know is where they're going to put those coins. And it's not just a matter of, oh, well, he's got a bunch of Ronin, he's probably going to put them on the Ronin, right? You have to kind of guess what your opponent's going to do. So if they're going to dump a whole bunch of money into Ronin, maybe you can beat them, maybe you can't, but maybe it's not worth that gamble. Maybe you save your coins for another battle, or maybe you suicide all your guys and take a bunch of honor and let them put all the Ronins out there they want, because it's not going to do them any good. So I thought that was really fun.
Pure genius. Eric Lang is a very good designer, and I think one of my favorites. I'm very impressed with almost everything he's done, even if it's not a game that I love. He's got so many clever things that he's put into a game. He managed to make games very streamlined, and this battle might be the peak of his design, in my opinion. I am just shocked by how great this battle system worked, because it wasn't only the things that Chris and Steve just said about it, but also the order that it happened. And that every one of the 4 possible things you could bid on this action could potentially change the value of the other actions. So, for example, you could take a hostage from somebody if you bid highest on it. But what if the person that you're in battle with just did seppuku on all their characters and sacrificed them all? So they just did that, got a bunch of points and honor, and now you've just given your coins away for nothing. You get absolutely no value out of it if they didn't have a character left in there to sacrifice. And that kind of continues on down the road. What if somebody took a hostage and then you were hoping that you would get points at the end for the poets, for having the most characters destroyed, but that character just got taken out of the battle, so just reduced one of your points there. This battle system was so clever and so fun, and just left to so many clever moments. Like the first battle of the game I got into with Chris, he just completely out-thunk me on this. Like, I just had not even seen where this game could go or where this battle system could go until Chris pulled like 3 tricks on me in the very first battle of the game. I managed to get a couple of clever movements in later on, and it was great to do that. But wow, what a cool system this was.
I'd love to say that those were planned out fully and really intentional moves, but I probably lucked into some of them. Like, for example, and I forgot to mention before, one of the really clever things that happens is it's the coins that are making all this happen. You're bidding coins, you're bidding coins, you're bidding coins. Then at the end of the battle, the losers get rid of all their coins. So basically those go back into the supply. But the winner has to pay all the coins they played to the loser or losers of the battle. So in the first battle that Steve and I had, I mean, he was doubling down. He knew what he wanted to do, and he was playing like tons of coins. I think he played something like 13 or 14 coins. And then at the end of the battle, he killed me. And I got that 14 coins, which let me do some of that stuff that I needed to do when I was in the battle with Tim. So, I mean, just so much stuff going on in this battle sequence. It's amazing. absolutely wonderful. Probably my favorite new combat mechanism.
And well, I think then that what you just said is that's one of the clever things about it too, right? Is that the battles are going to happen over multiple areas in this round. And so basically you can make sacrifices in early battles in the round to get honor, which could win you tiebreakers, or to get coins, which could make a big difference into what you can do in other actions of the game. And so the first round I didn't catch that, but by the second and third round I'm starting to be like, well, I'm going to throw a character over there just to lose a battle so I can get some coins out of it, or just to hopefully do seppuku and get my honor back up to the top of the track so I win the next battle. Wow, what a cool group of systems. And what if everybody wants to get their honor back up so everybody does seppuku? Like, it's such a cool mind game, such a clever system going on here.
I said there was two, one that I really liked and one that I didn't like so much. So now I'm going to get into the didn't like so much. So having played now Blood Rage and then Rising Sun and Ankh, which I think in chronological order, they came out Blood Rage, then Rising Sun, then Ankh. And unfortunately, I don't know what happened, but after Blood Rage, Eric Lang seems to have decided that including some weird human ambiguity into the game made it better. And by that, I mean the alliances and the negotiation piece of this. No surprise to anybody who's heard me talk about this, including last week's discussion of diplomacy. I do not like negotiation in board games. I do not like alliances in board games. I think, well, actually, first, let me caveat this by saying that it made a huge difference, I think, that we were playing a 3-player game tonight instead of a 4-player game, because I think this would be an entirely different dynamic at 4 players. But at 3 players, there was just so much opportunity for just really unfortunate impacts on the odd man out. I mean, the first round, Tim and I formed an alliance, and it, worked out pretty well for us, I thought. The second round, I had a pretty decent lead at that point, so they formed an alliance. And then in the third round, I think I just said something that pissed them off, and they formed an alliance again. And it dramatically impacted the things I was able to do, to the point where, just because of the way things worked out and the lack of alliances, I really wasn't able to put out strongholds during the course of the game. And for my faction, it was all about putting out strongholds. And I felt so limited in what I was able to do. Well, actually, here's a perfect example. In the harvest action, if you're in an alliance, it's great. You get to pull these huge resources like points and coins and everything from these spots, these territories, based on who has the most power in that territory. If you're not in an alliance, you get a coin. I mean, it was absolutely frustrating, to the point where, and I don't blame you guys for this. I mean, you were playing it the way you felt you needed to play it, and it was probably a good strategy because I came in last. But it lost a lot of the fun, for the second 2 rounds. It felt like so little agency in some of the things that were happening. And like I said, this is not, I think, ideal as a 3-player game. I think with 4 players it'd be different, because you'd have constantly shifting alliances, and everybody would have that incentive. But at 3 players, I thought that was a real weakness in this game.
Yeah, I felt the same way. It's possible Chris might have won if I would have allied with him, or if Tim would have allied with him in the last round. Probably not. But over the course of 3 turns, it will definitely make a difference who you're allied with or not. I think 4 players would play really well, not just for the alliance bonuses, but it would also made the negotiation a lot more interesting. Right? Essentially, in a 3-player game, you're almost always just going to gang up on the leader, unless Chris pisses me off, and then I'm going to go against him anyway. But
and then you gang up on the guy in last.
I mean, yeah. Generally, right, 3 players, if you can help another person, right? It's like 3-player Catan. 3-player Catan, someone's way in the lead. You want to make a trade. You've got 2 equal choices. You're not going to give your cards to the person in the lead. But in 4 players, the dynamic changes significantly, because in this game, you're allowed to negotiate at almost every stage, right? It's not just about forming the alliances. You can negotiate during combat. You can say, hey, if you don't put all your Ronin out on the board this time, in that next battle coming up, I'll do this thing for you, right? You can say, you know what, we're going to be buddies. I'm going to tell you that I'm going to sacrifice my guys so that you don't spend all your coins, because I don't I want you to have coins to beat this other guy in a later battle. And in 4 players, I think that would have been a little more interesting. We didn't really get into it. It's also just not really our thing, but I think 4 players would have been a lot different.
Yeah, I think this game is going to succeed or fail based on how you feel about negotiation in a lot of cases. Now, again, we are not into negotiation a lot, so it actually didn't come up. Obviously, you're forced to in the Tea Party phase, and that did cause some bad feelings across the board. I got lucky that I happened to be in an allegiance with every round, but I also found it clever that it can be used as a catch-up mechanism, right? Even in a 3-player game, Chris had a huge lead going into the second round. It made perfect sense for me and Steve to ally, and it gave us a little bit to catch up to him. Now, if Chris hadn't kept saying that Steve was honorless the entire second round, he probably would have gotten ally in the third round when I was in the lead. But, Chris, that's tact. You got to use some tact. That's part of just being a friendly person when you're playing games.
I probably overstated that. He's not a completely honorless person. He was just playing without honor.
All right, no alliances next game either.
I think there are going to be people that love this about this game, right? There are people that just love that, like, I'm going to negotiate constantly. I'll be honest, like, I think it would have worked probably better in 4 players. I agree with that. But I also think if Adam had been playing with us tonight, he probably would have pissed me off because he would have been trying to negotiate with every single move. And it would have slowed the game down a little bit, and it would have annoyed me because I'm terrible at negotiation. So the fact that we barely touched it made it not too bad for me. So I think this game is going to go really well for people that like negotiation a lot, and it's going to go okay for people that everybody doesn't like it. But if you got a group where a couple people love it and a couple people don't, this game would be a complete fail for me. And I'm so glad that you guys didn't get too far into that tonight, because I think it would have really been annoying. As it was, we barely touched on it. But I think, Chris, it's a good point and probably the weakest part about this game for our group and for me personally. So I want to talk about one more mechanism here. And, there's a lot going on, but I thought that the harvest was very cool. It was a good way to make the area control meaningful, not just for combat. So in a 3-player game, only 5 regions are going to go to combat every round, and it's going to be set up randomly. But there's 7 regions, 8 regions on the board. So that means that there's 3 regions that aren't even going to be in combat. But there's this harvest action that can be taken during the political phase that allows you to get whatever, if you've got the majority in there, to get whatever benefit is printed on that part of the map. And so it was kind of fun to have, like, hey, there's only 5 regions that are up for combat, which are obviously going to give you some good rewards. But there was a lot of reasons to put characters into other spaces on the map for other rewards, and maybe put them in other spaces, harvest, and then hope a move action happens. And that was really clever. So I like that. I thought that was it was a really interesting way to add an extra detail of kind of resource gathering and management in what would otherwise be just, get the most power in any particular region for a combat.
I don't have anything to say about the harvest. I think you covered it all, but we didn't talk very much about the training cards, right? One of the actions that you can take other than harvest or recruit is you can train. And that it gives you some kind of ongoing improvement. That's where the fancy monsters come in. That's where you get residual buffs. There's virtues and some other bonus. I forget what they're called. There's endgame points in there. There's money you can get at the beginning of every war round. And I think those had a pretty big impact on the game. And the costs are pretty varied on them. So if you are short on money when you get to that training phase, it's going to restrict which training cards you can buy pretty heavily. And even if you have money, making the decision to spend that money on a training card that you're not going to be able to spend in combat is a pretty weighty decision.
Yeah, great economy with these cards. Interesting effects, a nice variety. It was fun to see them pop up. And again, another way of that there's variability, because every game you're going to shuffle in a different set of cards that are going to come up in a season along with the basic cards. I love this part of it. It reminds me very much of Blood Rage and the different cards you can draft. It reminds me of some of the engine building in Ankh. Great, fantastic.
Yeah, before we played, I wish that I had looked over some of the cards to see kind of where they went, because one of the things that I didn't realize was that a lot of these endgame scoring was going to come from these cards, the winter cards, the endgame scoring cards that would reward you for having Like it would, for example, give you 2 victory points for each virtue card you had, or 2 victory points for each monster that you had. So there's some really interesting ways to plan ahead and some ways to determine which path you wanted to go down to try to build your points that I felt unprepared for because I didn't do my homework ahead of time, but I would love to dig into that more.
All right, last thing I want to mention here is the action selection mechanism, which is the political phase here. This uses something that's been used in a lot of other games, which is kind of a lead and follow mechanism. Like I take an action, everybody gets a benefit, but I get a stronger benefit for it. And there's one unique thing here, and that is that if you're allied with somebody, then they also get the better benefit, with you. So that's one of the reasons for allying. But what I thought was more interesting is that it's not just, hey, here's 6 actions you can take, you pick it, you get the best benefit, everyone else can do something, the next person picks one. In this case, there's a random selection of 4 of these tiles you're going to pick. I think there's 2 of each of them set up. I'm not sure if that's 100% right, but I think there's 2 of each of the 5 tiles. And so when you pick 4 tiles, you're going to get probably between 3 to 4 choices to make. And you get to make that choice, but then you also get to make the choice of what are 3 of the 4 tiles that the person that goes after me gets to pick. So, hey, I don't want him to take this action. I'm going to take that action. Or I hope he takes that action, so I'm going to take this other action because I want to take it after me. Added a little extra layer to that lead and follow mechanism that I haven't. It's something I don't usually appreciate, and I really enjoyed it here. I thought it was really meaningful and really impactful.
Yeah, I thought that was really fun too. This is one place where I actually did like the alliances, or at least I should say, I would theoretically have liked it if I had actually ever been in an alliance. But no, what I liked about this was that it was a defined benefit for the alliance. You start throwing the door wide open to all kinds of shenanigans when you get into the full-on straight-up negotiations. But at least with this, there was, a very defined benefit, so you didn't have to negotiate that part of it. I thought that was kind of cool. I liked that everybody got to take the action, and I liked that the person who actually picked the action got the benefit of taking it last, or in the rare case, like the train action, you get to go first because you want to have the first access, first choice of those cards. So I thought that was very nicely done, and I thought it really added a nice dynamic to the game.
All right, well, let's jump into the production and theme of Rising Sun. This is a game that I wish we'd had a chance to play in person and not on Tabletop Simulator on a first play, because obviously Kaman is known for their beautiful miniature sculpts and artwork and everything. But I'll just say that I think overall as a production, a look and feel, it definitely represented, ancient Japan. Great artistic choices here, things that I don't think a lot of publishers would have gone with, and I think they knocked that out of the park. Very interesting artwork on the map. It reminds me of going to the Art Institute of Chicago and looking at kind of the Japanese prints section of that. It felt like ancient Japan here, which is obviously what they're going for. And I thought it was great. Artwork was great. The miniatures looked cool from what I could see of them. So I really like the production here, and I would like to play with this in person.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And for anybody who's played a CMON game before, you're going to know exactly what you're getting here. It's going to be a big production with big figures. The art, like Tim said, was beautiful. It actually reminded me, and not just because of geographic proximity, but to some of the really nicely done art in Awaken Realms Great Wall. It really puts you in a sense of place because the Japanese style of art is so distinctive, and they captured it, I think, so nicely in this game that it really does give you that sense of place when you're playing the game. And I love that. I thought it was great.
Well, I don't have anything groundbreaking to say here, but it was very pleasant to look at. I thought the scaling on the miniatures was excellent. Sometimes people get the scaling off. I thought they were great. The attention to detail on both the minis, the card backs, not just the card fronts, but even all the card backs for the different seasons had nice, distinctive, simple patterns on them. The color scheme was nice. Even the point token was nice, right? Everything just fit really well together and was pleasant to look at.
Yeah, and I'll mention user experience here. Like one of the probably easiest rule books to reference that I've had a chance to. We did have to go back and reference it a few times throughout the beginning because I think it's a game that's fairly heavy to teach, even though it's not super complicated once you know it. But we were able to reference the rule book really easily across the board. All the iconography was easy to understand. The placement, the layout, everything was so easy to understand. One of the better user experience. examples that I've seen in a long time.
Quite the opposite almost from last week's rule books, right?
Yeah.
There was definitely a lot more iconography that was harder to process in Circadian's Chaos Order, that's for sure. All right, well, let's talk about our final question here, and that is, would you request to play the game again?
And the answer for me has got to be yes, I do want to play this game again. I love Eric Lang games. I thought there was so many cool things happening here. I mean, we kind of were over the top about the combat mechanisms, and absolutely that was top notch. But I don't think this game could ever be in heavy rotation for me because I just did not like the negotiation and alliance building. To me, that was enough, I think, to knock it out of contention for being a real top-notch game, which is so sad for me because there is so many great things happening there that it breaks my heart that I feel like those other aspects kind of stole the game back away from me. So damn you, alliances, and damn you, negotiation. You just stole a great game right out of my clutches. But yeah, I still want to try it again, and I really want to try it again at 4 players or some even number of players because I think that's going to make a huge difference in the gameplay, and it might really temper those things about the game that I didn't love.
I would request to play this game again, even with the negotiation, even at 3 players. And one of the big reasons that I would like to play it again is something something that Chris touched on earlier, and that's the endgame scoring. Like our scores tonight were extremely low, based not only on how high the tracker went, but just looking at the potential endgame points. Like we barely scratched the surface. And so, we were all within 10 points here tonight, but with a high score of 34, like that's not saying very, very much. And some of those end game cards could have easily given 15, 18, 20 points. And I think the biggest bonus we got from an end game card was 9 points. No one got a set of 5 or more combat tiles. Those sets can give you 25 points. So I think that like we barely scratched the surface of actually scoring because we were so focused on the political maneuvering and the combat, which was fun, but it wasn't really giving us a lot of points. And I think like Chris said, if we would have known what those endgame points really were going to be worth, we probably would have played the game differently. And I would like to see how that plays out.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Steve. I mean, literally, if your only focus was just to win a combat in each region of the board, like that would have been worth another 20 points than any of us, had gotten in that end game scoring at the end. So that alone would have been a fun mini goal to go after in the game, regardless of what else you were doing. So yeah, there's a lot to explore here. I think I loved this game. I loved it a lot, and I will request to play it again. I was actually shocked by how much I enjoyed it. I was shocked by how, after watching a rules video of it where it seemed kind of convoluted, how streamlined it was. I was also shocked by how the combat, which looked like it was going to be slow and complicated, actually ran really quickly and had a lot of fun, interesting decisions that went along with it. So this was a big surprise for me. When this first came out, maybe 3 years ago, and every single podcast that I listened to had to cover it right away. And I was like, oh man, I'm Rising Sunned out. I have no interest in playing this game. It didn't sound that great to me, but holy cow, did I have fun throughout this game. So yeah, I enjoyed it. There could be a game night with the wrong people where this would just be a miserable game, or just not as fun anyway for me. But I'm not sure. Maybe not. Maybe the mechanisms lend itself enough where you could let somebody sit there and argue about whether they want to trade a coin for a character or something for 5 minutes, and I could be having fun just playing my own solitary game over there. I think there's some complaints to be had about the player count, as you mentioned, and the alliances, when that doesn't work, and the potential for negotiation causing problems. But there's a lot of fun stuff here. So pretty excited about playing it again. And if I know Adam, he'll listen to this review and really regret that he missed out on it, and we'll end up playing it again as a 4-player at some point. So we'll probably get a shot. All right, so let's jump into one last question, which is kind of unique for this, and this is the third of the Eric Lang trilogy, the Troops on a Map trilogy, and we finally had a chance to play all 3 now: Blood Rage, Rising Sun, and Ankh, Gods of Egypt. And so I think it's worth just discussing briefly which was our favorites. And so I'm going to start with this one. Blood Rage is still a favorite for me, partly because it is so streamlined and because I know it so well. But shockingly, I think Rising Sun has better I think it's got a more interesting mechanism set. And I don't know if it's going to hold up for me. And I don't know if some of the concerns we have about it are going to outweigh that. But holy cow, I could see playing this a bit more and getting into a groove with people where you knock this out in 90 minutes. And there's so many fun and interesting decisions to happen in this game. So I think it could rise. Now, Ankh, we've only played once, or at least I have, and I really enjoyed that play. I think I like Rising Sun a little bit more. So I would say Blood Rage, Rising Sun, Ankh right now. But I could see Rising Sun rising. Could be a Rising Sun for me. I don't know, though. I don't know. That'd be hard. It'd be hard to knock Blood Rage out, but I'm really impressed with this game. It's a very cool game.
So Blood Rage is also number one for me. I think for all the reasons that you just said, it's so streamlined and it's so elegant. Now, Rising Sun, I do agree with you. It has some better mechanisms, but it also has a couple of mechanisms that I really disliked. And I'm not going to say more about that because I've already yammered on about that for a long time here. So I won't say more about negotiation and the alliances, but that was enough to really put this game at the bottom of that list for me. So I think Rising Sun would have to be third, even though I think the majority of the mechanisms were actually better. That was enough to kill it for me. So in descending order for me, it would have to be Blood Rage, Ankh, and then Rising Sun. I wish it was different. I feel like Rising Sun should be there at the top, but it's just not to be for me.
Wow. Ankh even beat it, even though you really, really did not like that merge mechanism.
I liked it better than I like negotiation and alliances.
Well, I am going to have to go with Rising Sun as my first pick of the three. I like Blood Rage, but there are some things that I don't love about it. Specifically the combat cards. And I know you guys always say how much you love the combat in Blood Rage. And I do like card drafting. And that's, like, to me, that's the fun part about those combat cards. I don't really like how disparate they are. And how best case scenario you memorized every card that went through the draft and have a likely guess of who took what. It's still pretty big crapshoot what the other player's going to play. And I don't know. It's streamlined, but it's just not super exciting for me. But I do still like it. It's a good game. And so Blood Rage still takes second of those for me.
And Ankh doesn't, it's not competitive with those two.
I only got to play it once, I think. It just seemed like another area control game with extra mechanisms that didn't really add to the fun. I'm not saying it's not interesting, it just didn't seem particularly fun. Blood Rage is fun. It's fast, you're moving big minis around on the map. Even though maybe the mechanics aren't super interesting, at least it's fun. This game, I thought the mechanics were super interesting, and it wasn't just an area control game, where Blood Rage is definitely just area control. Other than some very specific point bonuses you can get. But so, yep, that's how I feel about it.
Steve just made a couple comments that really made me kind of relive our play of Ankh. I really appreciated the points he made, and they did remind me that feeling of that game was a little overly complicated to me. I'm actually going to change my answer. I'm going to go back and I'm going to say Blood Rage, Rising Sun, Ankh, because Rising Sun had some real highs and some real lows. I felt like Ankh was a little bit more just a little bit flat and maybe a little bit overly complicated. So Steve kind of opened my eyes back to the experience of Ankh, and I think I got to change my answer there.
Yeah, I think we'll have to play the three together in one weekend and get you a refresher on Ankh, because Ankh had some really, really cool and clever mechanisms as well that I think you guys are forgetting about. But yeah, fair enough. I think that will wrap up our conversation on Rising Sun tonight. Big winner for me. Let's jump over to a Rising Sun themed cocktail, as well as some games that have been on our table right after this. All right, welcome back, Chris. What do you have for us in feudal Japan tonight?
Yeah, so one of the great things about Rising Sun that I mentioned before is this amazing sense of place in this game. The beautiful art, gameplay inspired by feudal Japan, and what a great opportunity to jump into a cocktail that has a little bit of history. But here in BGHT land, it's also the middle of the summer, and so I was looking for something that was also a little bit refreshing. And what I've got for you is the Japanese whiskey highball. What's that you say? A whiskey cocktail to drink with Rising Sun? Absolutely. So whiskey is one of my favorite drinks, and as many serious whiskey drinkers know, Japanese whiskey has a history that may not be so long, but it is very rich. Whiskey was historically a very Western liquor, but all of that changed in the mid-19th century when the United States essentially bullied its way into a trading relationship with Japan. Prior to that time, Japan had remained really intentionally isolated. They didn't want anything to do with trading with the West. Then, in 1853, the U.S. Navy showed up in force in Tokyo Harbor with a fleet of warships and demanded that the two countries began trading. Their parting gift, and I'm saying this with air quotes, was a barrel of whiskey to commemorate the signing of the Convention of Kanagawa. So fast forward 100 years and about 2 world wars later, and the seed of that first barrel had sprouted into a fledgling Japanese whiskey industry after the citizens of Japan really learned to appreciate that Western drink. So there were some fits and starts, but now Japan is actually the 4th largest producer of whiskey in the world, and it has bottles that'll rival the best that you can find anywhere. Some of you may even recall the awesome 2003 film Lost in Translation, in which Bill Murray plays an aging American movie star visiting Tokyo to film a Suntory whiskey ad, which I still love. When it's relaxing times, it's Suntory time. So it's never my bad voice acting. Now for the cocktail. So drinkers in Japan have been making the whiskey highball for about as long as the country's been producing whiskey. Some say this is because folks in Japan like to drink whiskey with a meal, and just straight whiskey by itself doesn't really lend itself to that. But you add some soda water, and bam, you've got yourself a fine drink to go with any meal, and it adds to that refreshment factor, making this a really fine summer drink. Here's what you're going to need. 2 ounces of Japanese whiskey and soda water. That is it. The construction on this one is half of the fun, though. So, and I'm serious, this is for real. First, you're supposed to place 1 large ice cube in a highball glass and stir it until frost starts to form on the glass. You pour off the excess water, add 1 more ice cube and the whiskey to the glass, and stir it, for real, clockwise 13 times. Not 12, not 11, not 14, but 13 times. Then you're going to add a 3rd large ice cube, top it off with soda water, and stir 3 times to mix it all together. I will not lie to you, I did not do the 13 stirs. I kind of did it the sloppy American way of just putting it all in a glass, stirring it together, and I thought it was very delicious. And a little secret, I think you can actually put in some other flavors of sparkling water into this, and it could actually make it even more fun if you wanted to experiment with your flavors a little bit. So anyway, give it a try. Stir it 13 times if you want to, and then stand back and enjoy your artistry. Kanpai.
All right, so I am traveling this week. As I mentioned, I'm in Long Beach, California, without my normal liquor collection at home, and so I still decided to go and make this drink. But luckily, it was only 2 ingredients. It was Japanese whiskey and it was soda water. So I go to the local store. They have just 3 Japanese whiskeys. One's like $75, one's like $40, and one's like $33. So I bought the $33 Japanese whiskey because, it's a one-time drink for me. I don't know if that made a difference. I have had some Japanese whiskeys that I liked in the past, but I do think I still prefer your classic Kentucky bourbon over any other form of whiskey, and that's no different here. The Japanese whiskeys remind me more of a Scotch whiskey, which I'm not a huge fan of. So this was an okay drink, entertaining. I did stir it exactly 13 times in a clockwise direction, and it didn't really help. But if you like Japanese whiskey, this was a refreshing way to drink it.
I can't believe the 13 stirs didn't do it for you.
So, Steve, did you have anything that you've played recently you want to talk about?
Well, I have played some classics this week, but the game I will mention is Wonder Woman 84. It is a lightweight card game. My wife picked it up. She thought it would be fun to play, and we actually got it out of the box this week. And we have played it several times and had a great time every single time. Plays 2 to 4 players. We've only played it with 2 players. But the concept is pretty simple. You have a deck of action. Each player has a deck of action cards, and those actions are either a lasso, a boot, a fist, or a combination of those actions. I think there's one more. Oh, blocking. You can block. So there's 4 actions. And then there's a stack of enemy cards, and each card you turn a couple over. Each card has a certain number of actions that it takes to defeat that enemy. And then they have some bonuses that you get. So one of the bonuses might say, if you play at least 2 blocks, you draw 2 citizens. And another one might say, have the most diversified actions. And whichever of the players plays the most diversified actions on a given enemy will get an extra citizen. And so as you defeat those enemies, you collect your rewards in citizen tokens, and you put up another enemy. And at the end of each hand, you can discard as many cards as you want. You draw back up to 5, and you just keep playing. The game ends when either you've defeated 10 enemies or you've saved all of the citizens. The citizens have random values of 1 to 3 on them. And so at the end of the game, you add up your citizen points, and whoever has the most wins. So just a simple, lightweight game, but we had a good time with it.
So this is a cooperative game, right? There's no way to play competitive.
You are always competing for collecting the most citizens.
So you're competing with each
Yes.
other, even though you're all working towards the same goal. Okay, well, that's interesting.
You're all trying to defeat the same enemies, but it is highly competitive. Like, you don't want to help your opponents. So, like, the card will say, like, have the most diversity. You will intentionally play actions just to block the other players from being able to play that same act, so that they can't match your diversity.
You can't lose the game to the game. Like, you can't lose to the game. The game's always going to end, and somebody's going to win.
Yeah, it's not cooperative, other than that you're both attacking the same enemies, but you're trying to get in each other's way and steal those actions. And yeah.
Did you guys see Wonder Woman 84? Did either of you watch the movie?
No.
I have not seen it yet, but I would like to.
It started out really entertaining. I was watching this, and it didn't get great reviews. And I was like halfway through it going like, this is a fun movie. And holy cow, does this movie go downhill in the last act of the film. So set your expectations low. You might actually enjoy it. It's got some fun things going on with it. All right, cool. So Wonder Woman 84, the card game. And this was by Cryptozoic Entertainment. All right. The game I'm going to talk about is a little bit older. This is a game from 2007. And this is the classic Uwe Rosenberg game, Agricola. I'm talking about this because this is out on Board Game Arena right now. And this was one of the first hobby games I got introduced to probably back in 2015 or 2016. I mean, I'd played other hobby board games, but this is when I really started getting into the hobby. And first couple of games, I played this, really loved it. I ended up getting this in my collection, tried it solo one time, decided it wasn't a good solo game for me, and I sold it. And I regret it so much because this is on Board Game Arena right now. And I have been having a blast playing this. I've played like maybe 7 or 8 games of it in the last month. It is amazing. So this is a worker placement game. It's about trying to build up a farm in the Middle Ages or sometime in that era. And it's so clever in a number of ways. I can't believe this game was made 14 years ago because it's so good. A couple things about it. One is that the worker placement spaces grow over the course of the game. It's not completely novel, but it's pretty neat. At first, you're going to add like 4 more worker placement spaces, and you know what those 4 are going to be, but you don't know what order they're going to come up in. And so that's something that changes game to game. And then there's a harvest phase. Now, harvest is one of the games that leads to this game being known as Misery Farm. Because in a harvest, you have to feed the people in your farm. Now, you start with 2 workers, and you have to give them 2 food each. So you have to have generated 4 food by the 4th round of the game. Doesn't seem too hard, and it's typically not to do with that first round. There's a couple ways to generate food. But as the game moves on, you're going to harvest more frequently. So I think the next time it's like you harvest after 3 rounds, and then 3 rounds, and then it's 2, 2, 2, and then 1 round or something like that. But it gets more and more challenging. Now your farm is getting bigger, right? So you're going to start to do things like build improvements that let you turn grains into food, or turn your cows that you've raised into food. But when you're giving up those grains and those cows, you're giving up potential victory points. Because the other thing about this game that makes it a misery to play is that at the end of the game, you're going to lose points if you don't have every spot on your board covered. Yeah, you're going to lose points if you don't have at least some of each type of animal, cows, pigs, and sheep. You're going to lose points if you don't have pumpkins and grains. So there's a lot of things you have to do to just not lose points, but then you can get more points. The more, if you have a certain number of cows, you're going to get more points. If you have a certain number of people in your farm, which you can have kids, but you first have to build up your farm. You have to add rooms to your farm in order to add more people into your farm. That's all fun. Another thing I like about this is worker placement space is kind of like Dune Imperium, where they escalate. So if somebody doesn't take a space, you add more things to it in the next round. So all of a sudden in the next round, it's a more exciting place. First round, 3 wood on that space. Well, 3 wood is pretty easy to get. 3 wood's not that great. Once there's 6 wood on there, all of a sudden that's one of the most desirable spots in the board. And so the fact that it does that with several things, with your reeds and your clay and your stone and your animals, these spaces get very competitive depending on how they grow. So that's exciting, that changes. But let me tell you the best thing about this, and Chris, you're going to like this because you're a fan of A Feast for Odin. And the thing that makes A Feast for Odin unique and interesting every time is those occupation cards. So Agricola has that as well, and I think they're even more interesting here. And the best way to play this game is you play it drafting 7 occupation cards and 7 minor improvement cards, which are all little upgrade cards that kind of drive your strategies in different ways and kind of give you different bonuses that are going to change from game to game. And if you can you're going to get 14 cards to start with. You're not going to play all of them. Maybe you play 5 of them, maybe you play 6 or 7 of them. But they're going to give you little ways to kind of focus your strategy and change what you're trying to do and how you can take advantage of them. This game is just fantastic. And if it wasn't for the outdated white border cards, Clemens Franz artwork, and theme, this game would blow me away if it came out today. So, unfortunately, this amazing game came out and it kind of introduced to us what a Euro game is going to look like and it's going to feel like. And it was a bad step in the wrong direction. And we're still seeing these games. In fact, there's another game I'll be talking about in the coming weeks that just falls right on its heels. But Agricola is still an amazing game. I wish I hadn't left my collection, and I plan to probably add it back to my collection again. I just love this game. I love it.
Man, Feast for Odin really took me by surprise, so I really can't judge. But holy crap, what a snoozer of a theme. I mean, it is so hard to muster any enthusiasm about Agricola. I mean, maybe if I tried it, I would feel different. I mean, I felt that way about Feast for Odin until I tried it. So, I don't know. Ugh, Agricola.
Tim, have you had the chance to play the 2-player version?
With you, I played it a few times with you, and there's an app for it that's pretty solid as well. So I did get into the app a little bit. So I probably played it like a dozen times or so. I think I like the original game more, but I do like what the 2-player version's doing. And as a 2-player version of it, I think it's pretty clever. Although I honestly think that Agricola is a fine 2-player game in and of itself as well. It's just got a little bit more going on. Yeah, right on. This is a game that I actually would like to bring back to the table and see if we can get a full review of this. I think it deserves it, and I'd love to hear what you and this was one of the games that Adam was like, I never want to play this game, and I honestly think you guys might both really enjoy it. Adam's people are all going to be starving, and he's going to be disappointed by it. But if he's in the right state of mind that night, he might actually enjoy this game. I think it's a very, very clever game.
Is there a game where you have to feed your people that his people don't starve?
Oh, yeah, I know, right? Yeah, no, he's not good at feeding his people.
Yeah, he's not much into feeding people.
All right, well, that will wrap up our conversation tonight. If you enjoy the show, please rate and review us on your podcast app of choice. Apple Podcasts is a very common one, and We have had some really great reviews on there recently, so I'm gonna read a couple new ones from this week really quickly. The most recent one, and the reason I want to read this, I'm not going to read the whole reviews. I'm just a couple quick points. The title was Great Show. This is from Razor6. And he said they were very conversational. The show's great. My only plea is to really try games that are a little older and that might not be super pretty, and talks a little bit more about that. So I want to mention two things, Razor6. Thank you for that comment. Thank you for the nice thoughts there. And I agree with you. No, one thing I would say is like go back and look at our catalog, because we have played a lot of older games in the past. El Grande is probably the most recent one. We've played Keyflower. These are games, it's all relative, but these are games that are like 10 plus years old in some cases. So I think you will find that we have some in our catalog. If you haven't gone back and listened to those, check them out. The way we pick games is basically we talk about games we want to play. And so if a game strikes our fancy, if it gets us excited because of something we heard from somebody else or something we saw, one of us will pick it. We'll try to convince the other people on the podcast, say like, hey, I really want to play this. Let's go into it. And so that's going to happen more, especially I think as we get through some of newer titles and start to continue to explore some things that are considered classics. We will play more of those older games in the future. The last thing though I'm going to say about that is that the numbers don't lie. Our listeners want to hear about new games. If we review a game that's older, we just have less listens to that episode. It's not drastic, but there's clearly people that are just going to skip an episode if it's a game they've heard about 100 times, or it's just not exciting to them. So we also want you guys to be enjoying the show, and we're going to continue to try to bring content that makes you happy. So keep that in mind. We're not being biased, although newer games do generally look better. They don't have white border cards, so we will talk about them more. The second review I'm going to mention just really briefly, though, is by Rub311. Just says, helps me understand games. Great show to understand a game by people who just played it. And he just mentioned that he found it searching for Lost Ruins of Arnak, said a few other things, left some emojis in his review. So thank you for saying that. But he mentioned that he found it by searching for Lost Ruins of Arnak. Again, just like I said about Everdell with somebody else finding us that way, it's one more reason to love Lost Ruins of Arnak. So I'll mention that. Anyway, thank you both for the great reviews. We have another one that came from Great Britain, but I don't have it up in front of me, so I'm going to read that one next week. Really appreciate when you all leave us reviews and we get to hear that you're appreciating the show and enjoying the show. So thank you for doing that. You can find us on Twitter at BG_hot takes. You can find us on Facebook at Board Game Hot Takes. And until next week, take care, everybody.
Good night, all.
Have a good week.